The moment that changed everything happened on a quiet Sunday afternoon. If you had driven past my house that day, you would have seen something perfectly normal. A gray two-story home, a maple tree shedding early leaves, and the smell of roasted chicken drifting through the open kitchen window. Nothing about it looked like the beginning of a family war. I'm 63 years old. My name's Daniel Harper. I spent 35 years running a small construction company in Ohio before selling it and retiring 3 years ago. These days my routine is simple. Coffee at 6, newspaper at 7, and a slow walk around the neighborhood before lunch. Life gets quiet when your wife passes. Margaret died 4 years ago. Heart failure. 40 years together. Gone in the span of one hospital night. After that, the house felt bigger. Too big. Sometimes I still catch myself turning my head when I hear a spoon clink in the kitchen. Like she's making tea again. But grief teaches you patience. And patience teaches you to notice things. That Sunday lunch was supposed to be a happy occasion. My son Tyler was bringing his fiancée over to meet me properly. I had already met her once before, briefly, at a restaurant 6 months earlier. Her name was Vanessa. Blonde, confident, perfectly dressed. The kind of woman who seemed like she'd stepped out of a luxury real estate advertisement. At the time, Tyler looked happy. That was enough for me. Still, something about her smile had felt rehearsed. Like she'd practiced it in a mirror. I brushed the thought away. Old men get suspicious too easily. So that Sunday I set the table for 3. Roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, sweet corn, Margaret's old Sunday recipe. I even used the good plates she insisted we save for important days. Tyler arrived first. He hugged me tightly at the door. Too tightly. "Hey, Dad." His voice sounded thin, like someone speaking while holding their breath. "Everything all right?" I asked. "Yeah," he said quickly. Then he looked over his shoulder toward the driveway. Vanessa stepped out of a black Mercedes. Not Tyler's car. A different one. Shiny enough to see your reflection in. She walked toward the house with the confident pace of someone who believed every room she entered belonged to her. "Mr. Harper," she said brightly as she stepped inside. Her perfume arrived a few seconds before she did. Something expensive and sharp. "Vanessa." I nodded politely. She hugged me. Not the warm kind of hug. The kind that lasts exactly 2 seconds and feels like a business handshake with arms. We sat down to eat. First, things seemed normal. Vanessa complimented the food. Tyler barely touched his plate. I asked the usual father questions. "So," I said casually, cutting into my chicken, "when's the wedding?" Vanessa's eyes lit up instantly. That should have been my first warning. "Oh, we've been talking about that a lot," she said. Tyler kept staring at his fork. Then Vanessa reached into her purse and pulled out a sleek tablet. She placed it on the table like someone laying down a winning poker hand. "Actually," she said, smiling, "I wanted to discuss something important." I wiped my hands on a napkin. "Go ahead." She tapped the tablet. Suddenly photos appeared on the screen. Luxury venues, crystal chandeliers, 5-tier wedding cakes, designer gowns, a beach ceremony in Malibu, a reception hall that looked bigger than my entire house. Vanessa turned the screen toward me. "This," she said proudly, "is the wedding Tyler deserves." I leaned back slowly. "Looks expensive." She smiled wider. "Oh, it is." Then she said it, calmly, like she was asking someone to pass the salt. "We estimate the total cost will be about $800,000. For a second, I honestly thought I misheard her. 800 what? Thousand, she repeated sweetly. Tyler's fork slipped from his hand and clattered against the plate. The room went quiet. Even the refrigerator seemed to stop humming. Vanessa folded her hands together politely. "And of course," she added, "since you sold your company for several million, we thought it would be appropriate for you to cover the wedding." She said it so smoothly it almost sounded reasonable. Almost. I stared at her for a moment. Then I looked at my son. Tyler wouldn't meet my eyes. His shoulders were tense. His jaw tight. Something was very wrong. Vanessa kept talking. "There will also be the Malibu venue deposit. the designer dress, the guest villas, and a private performance band from New York. She scrolled through numbers like someone browsing a shopping catalog. Honestly, she laughed lightly, 800,000 is actually a conservative estimate. Conservative. I suddenly felt Margaret's old advice echo in my head. When people show you who they are, Daniel, believe them. That's when Tyler leaned slightly toward me. Just for a second. His hand slid under the table. A folded napkin appeared beside my plate. He didn't look up. I casually picked it up and opened it. Inside was a short message written in shaky pen. Dad? SHE and Appos S a scammer. Help. I felt something deep in my chest shift. Not anger. Not yet. Something colder. Vanessa was still smiling. Still explaining the flower arrangements. Still acting like the check was already written. I slowly folded the napkin again. Then I leaned forward and smiled. Vanessa, I said calmly. She looked pleased. Yes. I looked straight into her eyes. Then I said two simple words. Of course. Tyler's head snapped up. Vanessa's smile stretched even wider. But inside, something else had already started. A quiet little engine in my mind. 35 years in construction taught me something valuable. When a building collapses, you don't panic. You study the cracks. And this woman standing in my dining room? She had cracks everywhere. I just needed time to see them all. So I raised my glass. To the wedding. Vanessa lifted hers happily. Tyler looked like he might faint. And I smiled. Because the moment someone thinks they've fooled you, that's when the real game begins. Somewhere in the back of my mind, I could almost hear Margaret chuckling. Soft, patient, like she already knew what I was about to do. I took a slow sip of iced tea and started planning. After Vanessa left that afternoon, the house felt different. Quieter. Not peaceful quiet. The kind of quiet that settles in after someone slams a door. Tyler stayed behind. He stood in the kitchen staring at the sink like a kid waiting for punishment. I poured 2 cups of coffee. Same mugs Margaret used every morning. Blue ceramic with tiny cracks along the rim. I slid one across the counter. All right, I said. Tyler rubbed his face. Dad.
I'm sorry.
For what exactly? I asked calmly. For bringing her into this. He looked exhausted. The kind of tired that doesn't come from lack of sleep. The kind that comes from realizing you made a very expensive mistake. I leaned against the counter. How long have you known? Tyler let out a slow breath. About 2 months. That made my eyebrow lift. 2 months. He nodded. At first she just talked about the wedding. Fancy venues, expensive dresses, stuff like that. That's normal, I said. Yeah, he replied. But then it kept getting bigger and bigger. He rubbed the back of his neck. Last week she said she already told her friends the wedding budget was $1 million. I whistled softly. Well, I said. At least she discounted it for me today. Tyler didn't laugh. She started asking about your money, he continued. How much you got from selling the company. How much the house is worth. If you invested it. I felt something tighten inside my chest. Not because of the money. Because of the calculation. That kind of curiosity doesn't come from love. That comes from planning. Tyler looked up at me. I didn't believe it at first, he said quietly. I thought maybe she was just ambitious. Ambitious, I repeated. Then I leaned forward. So what changed? Tyler reached into his jacket pocket. He pulled out his phone and placed it on the table. 3 nights ago, he said. He tapped the screen. A message thread opened. Vanessa's name sat at the top with a heart emoji next to it. Tyler scrolled down. Look at this. The message appeared. Vanessa. End quote. Once we get your dad to fund the wedding, everything will be easier. He's old. He won't question it. End quote. I read it twice. Then a third time. A small sound escaped my nose. Not quite a laugh. More like a sniff. Tyler watched my face nervously. You're not mad. Oh, I'm mad, I said. But anger is expensive. He frowned. What do you mean? I took a sip of coffee. When you react too fast. So what do we do? That was the moment something inside me shifted from father to strategist. 35 years running a construction company meant dealing with all kinds of people. Contractors who cut corners. Developers who hid fees. Clients who tried to sue after the job was finished. You learn something after a while. Liars always repeat themselves. And greed always leaves fingerprints. I stood up and grabbed my phone. First, I said, we gather information. Tyler blinked. How? I smiled. I call an old friend. 2 hours later, we were sitting in a small office above a downtown insurance building. The door read, Martin Ruiz, Private Investigations. Martin opened the door before we even knocked. Danny Harper, he said with a grin. Martin was 70 but still built like a retired boxer. Thick shoulders, gray mustache, eyes that missed nothing. We shook hands. Still scaring criminals? I asked. Only the ones who deserve it. He looked at Tyler. And this must be the kid who used to steal cookies from my kitchen. Tyler smiled weakly. Good to see you again, Mr. Ruiz. We sat down. I explained everything. The lunch. The $800,000 demand. The message Tyler showed me. Martin didn't interrupt once. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair. Then he chuckled. Oh, this one's interesting. Tyler looked nervous. You've seen something like this before? Martin nodded slowly. More than you'd think. He tapped his desk. Some people treat marriage like a business acquisition. I crossed my arms. So what do we do? Martin opened his laptop. Well, he said. First we check her past. He typed quickly. Full name. Vanessa Caldwell, Tyler said. Martin searched. The room filled with the clicking of keys. 30 seconds passed. Then Martin's eyebrows rose. Well now. He turned the screen toward us. 3 photos appeared. Different cities. Different men. Same woman. Vanessa. In one photo she stood beside a man at what looked like an engagement party. In another, she posed on a yacht holding champagne. Tyler leaned closer. What is this? Martin clicked another tab. A news article opened. The headline read, end quote. Local entrepreneur sues ex-fiancée over disappearing wedding fund. End quote. My coffee almost came back up. Let me guess, I said slowly. Vanessa. Martin nodded. 2 years ago. Chicago. Tyler's face turned pale. What happened? Martin skimmed the article. Guy wired about $320,000 for wedding planning. And bride disappeared 3 weeks before the ceremony. Tyler stared at the screen. You're kidding. Martin shrugged. No charges filed. Civil dispute. Hard to prove intent. He scrolled again. Wait. There's another one. Another article. Another engagement. This time in Dallas. Another large wedding fund. Another broken engagement. Another missing chunk of money. I leaned back in my chair slowly. Well, I said. That explains the Malibu venue. Tyler buried his face in his hands. Oh my God. Martin closed the laptop. So, he said calmly, your son's fiancée appears to run a very specific business model. I folded my hands together. And we're her next investment. Martin nodded. Looks that way. Tyler looked up anxiously. So what do we do? Call the police. Martin shook his head. Not yet. Why not? Because right now, she hasn't actually done anything illegal to you. I sighed. Of course. The smartest scams live right on the edge of the law. Martin leaned forward. But she will try something. Tyler swallowed. How do you know? Martin smiled slightly. Because people like that don't walk away from an $800,000 opportunity. I felt the gears turning in my mind. Good, I said. Both men looked at me. Because I already told her yes. Tyler's eyes widened. You what? I smiled calmly. Yes. Martin started laughing. A deep, satisfied laugh. Oh, Danny, he said. You sneaky old fox. Tyler looked between us like he'd walked into a different language. What's happening right now? I stood up and walked to the window. Outside, the sun was beginning to set over the parking lot. Long shadows stretched across the pavement. Vanessa thinks she's found an easy target, I said. I turned back toward them. But the problem with hunting old men, I paused, is sometimes they've been hunters longer than you've been alive. Martin nodded slowly. So we set a trap? I smiled. Oh yes. Tyler still looked nervous. What kind of trap? I picked up my coat. The kind where she thinks she's winning. Right up until the moment she loses everything. I sniffed lightly, almost like I smelled something unpleasant. Let's see how badly she wants that wedding. The strange thing about traps is that they work best when the prey believes it's the hunter. And Vanessa absolutely believed she was the hunter. 3 days after that Sunday lunch, she called me. Her voice came through the phone bright and cheerful. Mr. Harper, I just wanted to say how generous your offer was. I leaned back in my living room chair. What offer? I asked innocently. She laughed lightly. The wedding, of course. Ah yes, that one. Well, I said calmly. Family is important. It was interesting how quickly that word family rolled off her tongue. Tyler told me you might want to discuss the planning soon, she continued. Of course, I replied. In fact, I've already spoken with my financial advisor. That wasn't entirely true, but it sounded impressive. Oh, wonderful, she said. I suggested something a little different. I continued. Different? Yes, instead of paying hundreds of vendors separately, I'd rather create a single wedding trust. The line went quiet. I could almost hear the gears turning in her head. A trust? She asked. Yes, I said. A dedicated account. $800,000. Managed professionally. Silence. Then, oh my goodness. That's actually brilliant. Of course she liked it. Because in her mind, she'd just been handed a treasure chest. But treasure chests have lids. And naturally, I continued, we'd assign a trustee to oversee it. No problem, she said quickly. Transparency is important. Yes, transparency. That word always sounds funny when dishonest people say it. I sniffed quietly. Well then, I said, let's meet this Friday and finalize the paperwork. I'll be there, she replied eagerly. I hung up. Across the room, Tyler was sitting on the couch. He looked like a man watching a slow-motion car crash. You really told her you'd put $800,000 into a trust? I nodded. Yep. He rubbed his forehead. Dad. Martin's voice came from the kitchen. Relax, kid. He stepped into the living room holding 2 folders. Martin had become a frequent visitor over the past few days. Turns out retirement leaves a lot of time for interesting projects. We already know her pattern, Martin said. He opened one of the folders. Photos slid across the coffee table. 3 different men. 3 different engagements. 3 different wedding funds. And every time, money vanished shortly before the ceremony. Martin tapped the folder. She'll try to access that trust. Tyler frowned. But she can't, right? Martin smiled slowly. That depends. He looked at me. And that's where Danny's idea gets interesting. I reached over and opened the second folder. Inside was a stack of legal papers. At the top, Harper Family Wedding Trust Agreement. But the real star of the show wasn't the trust. It was the trustee. Tyler read the name, then blinked. Wait! He looked up at me. Dad. This says the trustee is my attorney, I finished. Her name was Linda Kessler. Linda had spent 25 years dismantling financial scams, and she loved doing it. Tyler still looked confused. But if the money's locked in a trust, Martin leaned forward. She'll try to manipulate the conditions. How? Martin smiled. Greed always gets impatient. Friday afternoon arrived. Vanessa showed up exactly 10 minutes early. She stepped into Linda's law office wearing a cream-colored dress that probably cost more than my first car. She looked around the room quickly. Expensive furniture. Mahogany desk. Wall of law degrees. The perfect setting for someone expecting to sign away $800,000. Mr. Harper, she said warmly. Vanessa. Tyler sat quietly beside me. Linda entered the room moments later. Good afternoon, she said professionally. Of course. Linda continued. The trustee, my office, will release funds only upon verified vendor invoices. Vanessa's smile twitched slightly, but only slightly. Perfect, she said quickly. Then she turned to me. I actually had a small thought about efficiency. Ah, here it came. What thought? I asked. Well, she said sweetly, some vendors require large upfront deposits. True, Linda replied. So maybe we should release a portion immediately, Vanessa suggested. How much? Linda asked calmly. Vanessa pretended to think. Perhaps $200,000 to start? Tyler nearly choked on air. I sniffed quietly. Linda looked thoughtful. Interesting idea. Vanessa leaned forward. Yes, it would make everything much smoother. Linda nodded slowly. Then she slid a new document across the table. Before any funds can be released, she said, we'll need identity verification. Vanessa blinked. Identity verification? Yes, Linda said. Standard anti-fraud procedure for large trusts. She tapped the paper. Background check, financial disclosures, prior civil litigation history. Vanessa's smile froze. Just slightly. Oh, I'm sure that's fine. Linda continued. It also includes a sworn affidavit confirming no prior involvement in financial disputes related to wedding funds. The room went quiet. Tyler looked at me. Martin, sitting quietly near the wall, folded his arms. Vanessa picked up the document slowly. Her eyes moved across the page. Then something changed. Just a little. The warmth left her expression. You know, she said lightly, this seems a little excessive. Linda smiled. For $800,000, it's actually minimal. Vanessa set the paper down. Well, maybe we should revisit the trust structure. I leaned forward. Vanessa, I said gently, you wanted transparency. She forced a small laugh. Yes, of course. Linda slid another paper across the table. This is where you sign the affidavit. Vanessa didn't touch the pen. Instead, she leaned back. Her eyes moved between all of us. And for the first time, she looked uncertain. You know, she said slowly, I suddenly remembered I have another appointment. Of course she did. She stood up quickly. I'll review this later. Then she walked toward the door. Martin spoke for the first time. Ms. Caldwell. She stopped. He opened the folder on the desk. 3 photographs slid forward. 3 men. 3 past engagements. Her face lost color instantly. Martin tapped the Chicago article. Funny thing about patterns, he said calmly. They're easy to spot. Vanessa stared at the photos, then at us, then at the door again. Her voice was suddenly colder. You set me up. I shrugged. You asked for $800,000. She grabbed her purse. This isn't over. And then she walked out. Fast. Heels clicking down the hallway. The office door slammed shut. Tyler exhaled slowly. Is it over? Martin smiled faintly. Oh no. He closed the folder. Now the interesting part begins. I sniffed softly, because traps don't end when someone walks away. Sometimes, that's when they snap shut. After Vanessa walked out of Linda's office, the room stayed quiet for a while. Not awkward quiet. The kind of quiet that comes after a storm passes but before anyone steps outside to see the damage. Tyler finally broke it. Did we just end it? Martin shook his head slowly. No. He closed the folder of photos. People like Vanessa don't disappear quietly when there's money involved. Linda leaned back in her chair. She'll try something else. Tyler looked uneasy. What kind of something? Martin gave a small shrug. Pressure. Lies. Maybe a threat or two. I stood up and stretched my back. Good. 3 heads turned toward me. Tyler frowned. Good. Yes, I said calmly. Because now she knows we're not stupid. Linda smiled slightly. And she knows we have documentation. Exactly. And documentation is a dangerous thing for people who build their lives on lies. The next move came faster than we expected. 2 days later, Tyler received a phone call. It was nearly midnight when he showed up at my house again. He looked pale. "She called me," he said. "What did she say?" I asked. Tyler rubbed his temples. "She's furious." I nodded. "That sounds about right." "She said we humiliated her." Martin, who had stopped by again that evening, chuckled. "Scammers hate paperwork." Tyler continued. "She also said something else." I waited. Tyler swallowed. "She said if we keep spreading lies about her, she'll sue us for defamation." That made me laugh. A real laugh this time. Tyler blinked. "Dad, this isn't funny." "Oh, it's a little funny," I said. "Why?" "Because people who plan to sue don't usually announce it first." Martin nodded. "Exactly." He leaned forward. "Did she say anything about the trust?" Tyler nodded slowly. "Yes." He pulled out his phone and opened a message. Vanessa had sent a long text. Tyler handed the phone to me. I read it quietly. The message was dramatic. Very dramatic. She accused us of betrayal, humiliation, emotional damage, and destroying her reputation. But buried inside that emotional storm was the real line that mattered. One sentence. "I already told people you promised to fund the wedding." I sniffed quietly. There it was. The pressure tactic. She was trying to create a social trap. Make it look like we backed out of a promise. Martin leaned back in his chair. "Well, that's predictable." Tyler looked worried. "What if she actually tries something?" Linda had predicted that question earlier. So the next morning we did something simple. We filed paperwork. Nothing dramatic. No lawsuit. Just a formal report documenting attempted financial manipulation tied to prior cases. The kind of quiet paperwork that sits patiently in a legal system waiting for someone to make a mistake. Linda explained it perfectly. "If she walks away," she said, "nothing happens. But if she tries the same trick again." Martin finished the sentence. "She walks straight into a very large legal wall." Tyler seemed relieved. But the real fallout didn't arrive until 3 weeks later. It was a Tuesday morning. I was sitting on my porch with coffee when my phone rang. Martin's name flashed on the screen. "Morning," I answered. Martin sounded amused. "Danny, you might want to see this." "See what?" "Turn on the TV." I stepped inside and turned on the news. The local station was running a short segment. A reporter stood outside a courthouse. Behind her was a familiar face. Vanessa. The headline read, "Woman investigated in multiple wedding fund disputes." I leaned against the wall. Well, that escalated quickly. The reporter explained that 2 previous fiancés had recently come forward after hearing about a similar situation through mutual contacts. Turns out, scams like that leave emotional footprints. And once people start comparing stories, patterns appear. Martin's voice came through the phone. "Looks like someone got nervous after our meeting." "Vanessa?" I asked. "Yep." "What did she do?" "She tried to convince another guy in Denver to wire her a wedding deposit." "And?" Martin chuckled. "The guy did something interesting." "What?" "He Googled her name first." I couldn't help smiling. "And he found the Chicago article?" "And the Dallas case," Martin said. "And guess who he called after that?" "Police. Lawyers." Ah, now the dominoes were falling. The news segment ended with a simple line. "Authorities are reviewing multiple financial complaints. No arrests." Not yet. But investigations have a way of growing. Like cracks in a wall. Once they start spreading, the whole structure weakens. Tyler came over that evening. We sat on the back porch watching the sunset. He looked lighter, like someone who had been carrying a heavy backpack and finally put it down. "I can't believe I almost married her," he said quietly. I nodded. "That happens more often than people think." He stared at the yard. "I feel stupid." I shook my head. "No." He looked up. "No. Stupid people ignore warning signs," I said. "You noticed them." He sighed. "But I still got pulled in. That's called being human." The wind moved softly through the trees. For a moment neither of us spoke. Then Tyler chuckled. "You know what the weirdest part is?" "What?" I think she actually believed she'd win. I sniffed lightly. That's the thing. A strange thing happens after a storm passes. First, everything feels quiet. Too quiet. For a few weeks after the whole Vanessa situation collapsed, life settled back into its usual rhythm. I woke up early, made coffee, and read the newspaper at the kitchen table Margaret and I had used for 40 years. But something had changed. Not the house. Not the neighborhood. Just the way I looked at things. When you spend decades building something, family, business, trust, you eventually learn that betrayal doesn't always come from enemies. Sometimes it comes wearing a smile and carrying a wedding invitation. Still, life moves forward. And it should. About a month after the news story aired, Martin stopped by my house again. He arrived with a paper bag of donuts and the kind of grin that usually meant he had gossip. "Well," he said, sitting down at the table, "there's an update." I raised an eyebrow. "Good or bad?" "Oh, definitely interesting." He pulled a folded newspaper from under his arm and slid it across the table. Page 3. Small headline. Authorities expand investigation into multi-state wedding fraud scheme. Vanessa's photo sat next to the article. Not the glamorous photo she probably preferred. This one looked like a driver's license picture taken under bad lighting. I read the article slowly. Apparently 2 additional complaints had surfaced. One from Denver. One from Phoenix. Both involving large wedding deposits. Both involving sudden disappearances. Tyler walked into the kitchen just as I finished reading. He grabbed a donut. "What's the news?" I turned the paper toward him. He read the headline, then whistled softly. "Wow." Martin shrugged. "Looks like the dominoes finally tipped." Tyler sat down. For a moment he just stared at the picture. Then he shook his head. "You know what's weird?" "What?" I asked. "I almost feel bad for her." Martin snorted. "Kid. She tried to take your father for 800 grand. Tyler nodded. "I know." He paused. "But imagine living like that." Martin raised an eyebrow. "Like what?" "Always calculating. Always pretending. Always chasing the next target." The room went quiet. It was a fair point, because people like Vanessa don't just scam money. They scam themselves too. They spend their entire lives building fake versions of happiness. Fake love. Fake success. Fake weddings. Eventually the performance becomes the only thing left. I took a sip of coffee. "That kind of life catches up with people," I said. Martin nodded. "Usually in a courtroom." Tyler laughed. A few weeks later, Tyler brought someone new to dinner. Her name was Emily. No expensive perfume. No luxury car. Just a friendly smile and a slightly nervous handshake when she met me at the door. "Mr. Harper," she said politely. "Daniel is fine," I replied. She carried a homemade apple pie. That alone earned her points in my book. During dinner, she asked simple questions. About the house. About my old construction company. About Margaret. Not about money. Not about investments. Not about the value of the property. Just normal questions. At one point Tyler caught my eye across the table. He looked relaxed. Really relaxed. The kind of relaxed you only see when someone isn't pretending. After dinner, Emily helped wash the dishes. No one asked her to. She just did it. When they left later that evening, Tyler lingered by the door. "Well?" he asked. "Well what? What do you think?" I rubbed my chin thoughtfully. "She seems dangerous." Tyler froze. "Dangerous?" "Yes." He blinked. "How?" "She brought pie." He stared at me. Then he laughed. A real laugh. "You're impossible, Dad." "Maybe." He opened the door. "But you know something?" I added. "What?" "This one looks real." Tyler nodded slowly. "I think so too." And then he left. Later that night, I sat on the back porch alone. The air smelled like autumn. Leaves drifting across the yard. Crickets humming somewhere in the distance. Moments like that make you think. About time. About people. About the strange ways life tests your judgment. Margaret used to say something I didn't fully understand until I got older. She'd say, "The best revenge isn't hurting someone who hurt you." Back then I thought she meant forgiveness. But that wasn't quite it. What she meant was something simpler and much colder. The best revenge is refusing to let someone destroy your peace. Vanessa wanted money, but more than that, she wanted control. Control over the situation. Control over the story. Control over how everything ended. Instead, she walked straight into a wall built from patience, paperwork, and a few very old lessons about human nature. I leaned back in the chair and sniffed softly. The night air smelled clean. Funny thing about scams. They depend on people rushing into love, rushing into promises, rushing into writing very large checks. But if you slow down, if you watch carefully, if you let people talk long enough, they usually tell you exactly who they are. You just have to listen. And when you do, well, sometimes all it takes to win the game is smiling and saying two simple words. Of course.